So what I have here is one of those, you always have these pie charts. I particularly like pie. And this particular pie chart here shows some different areas of the federal budget. Now this is the total of federal spending here, and the pieces of pie are roughly proportional. And what I would like to start this evening, so we have a big picture of how serious the excessive spending in the federal government is to start by making a distinction between a couple of types of spending. The first kind of spending, and maybe to some people this sounds like sort of Washington, D.C. talk, but it's called, they call it mandatory spending or entitlements. And mandatory spending, maybe not necessarily mandatory, but what that means is that legislators, maybe as much as 50 years ago, passed a series of laws, and those laws then automatically spit out dollar bills out of the Treasury. So somebody who happens to be the right person waves their hand in front of the little machine, out pops a dollar bill. And so we have these things, and they're called entitlements or mandatory spending. So these are places where the federal government just is automatically spending money. And there are some of them that are very familiar with most people. Social Security here, Medicare, and Medicaid. Those are the three big, as they call it, entitlements or mandatory spending. And there are other entitlements that are smaller, and that's in this category over here, the other, quote, mandatory spending. So these are not Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, but they're the other mandatory. And then there's another thing that acts just about like mandatory spending, and that is the interest on our debt. When the Treasury decides to sell a Treasury bill, the reason people buy a Treasury bill is because it's going to pay some interest to them. So we have to pay the interest on our debt. And in that sense, when we decide to spend money that we don't have, we are creating what is in essence like a little machine that spits out dollar bills. So let's say that you take all of this mandatory spending or entitlement spending and add it to the interest on the debt. How much does that add up to? Well, it adds up to about $2.3 trillion for this year. Now, what in the world does $2.3 trillion mean? Most of us don't have a good sense of perspective. Well, $2.3 trillion happens to be the revenue that the federal government collects this year. So in other words, what we're saying is if you take this purple and this aqua color and this gold color and light and dark blue here, you add this all together, this is equal to the revenue that comes in for the federal government. Well, what then does that leave out? Well, it leaves out these other two pieces of pie. One is defense, and one is non-defense. They're called discretionary because each year we decide how much money you're going to spend in those categories. So in other words, what we're saying, and I think this is really chilling, it sounds maybe a little boring to explain it, but just think about this a little bit. The entitlements and the debt service equals our revenue. That means if we want to balance a budget this year, what we'd have to do would be to get rid of all of defense. Not one soldier, not one plane, not one tank, not one ship, nothing. There'd be nothing in defense and nothing in the non-defense discretionary. No Department of Energy, no Department of Commerce, no Department of Education. There would be no park services. There would be no prisons. There would be the Homeland Security. So there's all kinds of things that the federal government does that we fund every year, which would be gone. So there'd be no defense and no non-defense discretionary. Well, the country wouldn't survive very well under those conditions. So that's the problem. These entitlements have grown so much that they've eaten up the whole budget. And so now this week we're going to be debating how we're going to cut this non-defense discretionary, cutting a little bit from defense, but mostly non-defense discretionary. And we're talking about $100 billion. Is that a lot of money? Sure, it's a lot of money. Is it a lot of money compared to the fact that we're about 1.3 trillion or 1.5 trillion over? Not so much then.